The cold concrete bit into his bones as he huddled against the wall, his weathered hands clutching a cardboard sign. "Veteran in need," it read. The busy streets of Washington, D.C. bustled around him, indifferent to his plight. Little did he know, his life was about to change forever. As the sleek black SUV pulled up to the curb, he barely lifted his head. But when the door opened and a familiar face emerged, his heart skipped a beat. Melania Trump, the First Lady of the United States, was standing before him. What happened next would leave millions in tears and spark a national conversation about the forgotten heroes of America. The bustling streets of Washington, D.C. pulsed with life, a stark contrast to the man who seemed to fade into the background. His weathered face and tattered military jacket told a story that most passers-by chose to ignore. This was John, a veteran who had once stood tall in service to his country, now invisible to the very nation he had sworn to protect. John's day began before dawn as he carefully folded his threadbare blanket. He stretched his aching joints, a painful reminder of the toll his service had taken on his body. With practiced movements, he packed his meager belongings into a worn backpack, ready to face another day of uncertainty. As the city awakened, John made his way to a local shelter, joining a queue of men and women, many wearing similar remnants of military uniforms. Their eyes reflected a shared history of sacrifice and struggle. The smell of coffee and scrambled eggs wafted through the air, a temporary comfort in a world that had become increasingly harsh. John's story echoed the challenges many veterans face when transitioning to civilian life. The skills that made him an asset in the military didn't easily translate to the job market. The structure and purpose that had defined his life for years suddenly vanished, leaving a void that seemed impossible to fill. Post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, further complicated his reintegration into society. As John wandered the streets, he passed gleaming government buildings and monuments dedicated to fallen heroes. The irony was palpable. These structures stood as testaments to bravery and sacrifice. Yet here he was, a living embodiment of that sacrifice, struggling to survive day by day. The systemic issues contributing to veteran homelessness are complex. Lack of affordable housing, inadequate mental health support, and difficulties in accessing benefits all play a role in pushing veterans to the brink. Many find themselves caught in a cycle of poverty and homelessness that seems insurmountable. As the day wore on, John found himself near a park where a small crowd had gathered. He edged closer, overhearing snippets of conversation about a visiting dignitary. For a moment, he allowed himself to imagine a world where people in power truly understood the plight of veterans like himself. The prevalence of veteran homelessness is far more shocking than most Americans realize. Behind the statistics lie real people, each with their own story of service, struggle, and survival. These are individuals who once stood shoulder to shoulder with their fellow soldiers, now left to face their battles alone on the streets of the nation they served. In a country that prides itself on honoring its military, the number of veterans living on the streets is a stark reminder of how far we have to go. On any given night in America, over 37,000 veterans experience homelessness, representing a staggering failure in our commitment to those who have served. The sleek black SUV pulled up to the curb, its tinted windows concealing the identity of its occupant. As the door opened, a hush fell over the crowd gathered outside the veterans' shelter. Melania Trump, the First Lady of the United States, emerged, her eyes scanning the faces before her. Her presence here, in this gritty part of Washington, D.C., was unexpected, and the air crackled with anticipation. Melania's journey to this moment had been unconventional. From her modest beginnings in Slovenia to her role as First Lady, she had navigated a path fraught with challenges and scrutiny. Critics had been quick to dismiss her potential impact, but those who looked closer saw a woman determined to use her platform for good, particularly in the realm of children's welfare and underserved communities. As she approached the shelter, Melania's mind drifted to the conversations she'd had with veterans during her time as First Lady. The pride in their eyes when they spoke of their service, the pain when they recounted their struggles upon returning home. These encounters had left an indelible mark on her, fueling a desire to do more. One conversation stood out in her memory. During a visit to Walter Reed National Military Medical Center, She had met a young soldier recovering from injuries sustained in Afghanistan. His words echoed in her mind. Ma'am, I know you see me here, getting better. But what about the guys who don't make it here? The ones who end up on the streets? That question had haunted Melania, prompting her to dig deeper into the issue of veteran homelessness. She had pored over reports, spoken with experts, and sought out the perspectives of veterans themselves. What she discovered was a complex web of challenges that defied simple solutions. As she entered the shelter, Melania was greeted by a cacophony of sounds and smells. The air was thick with the aroma of coffee and the murmur of conversations. She moved through the space, pausing to speak with veterans and shelter staff alike. With each interaction, she listened intently, her face a mask of concentration and empathy. When the visit drew to a close, Melania stepped up to a hastily arranged podium. The room fell silent as she began to speak, her accent adding a unique cadence to her words. Today, she said, her voice steady and clear, I have seen both the challenges faced by our veterans and the incredible resilience they possess. We must ensure that no veteran ever finds themselves without a home or hope. She outlined initiatives aimed at combating veteran homelessness, from increased funding for mental health services to partnerships with private sector employers. As she spoke, the energy in the room shifted. Eyes that had been wary now shone with cautious optimism. Melania knew that her actions here would be scrutinized, but she also knew that this was an opportunity to shine a light on an issue that had been in the shadows for far too long. The Veterans Shelter, a converted warehouse on the outskirts of Washington, D.C., hummed with nervous energy. Secret Service agents stood at attention, scanning the crowd of residents and staff. Melania had just finished outlining her initiatives, and the room buzzed with cautious optimism. As the First Lady's words settled, a palpable tension began to build. Whispers rippled through the crowd, hinting at an undercurrent of unease. In the back of the room, a man with haunted eyes and trembling hands wrestled with an internal struggle. Michael, though he hadn't heard anyone call him that in years, felt the weight of countless untold stories pressing down on him. The ghosts of Fallujah whispered in his ears, drowning out the voices around him. With a surge of desperate courage, he pushed through the crowd towards the First Lady. Time seemed to slow as onlookers gasped and security personnel tensed. Michael's mind raced, replaying the events that had led him to this moment. He remembered enlisting, full of pride and purpose. He recalled the searing heat of the Iraqi sun and the explosions that still echoed in his nightmares. And he thought of returning home, a stranger in his own country. As he drew closer, Michael's resolve wavered. He knew the consequences could be severe, being escorted out, forgotten, or worse. But the urgency of his mission propelled him forward. Melania's eyes widened as she noticed Michael's approach. Her security detail moved to intercept him, but she raised a hand, halting their advance. The room fell silent, all eyes fixed on this unexpected encounter. Michael stopped a few feet from the First Lady, his voice barely above a whisper. Ma'am, he said, his words carrying the weight of thousands of forgotten soldiers. We need more than just words. We need action. We need... His voice broke, unable to articulate the depth of need that had driven him to this moment. For a heartbeat, the future hung in the balance. Then Melania stepped forward, closing the gap between them. I hear you, she said, her eyes meeting Michael's. And I promise you, we will do better. She turned to her aide, speaking quietly but with purpose. Melania then addressed the room, her voice stronger now. This brave man has reminded us that our work is far from over. Today I'm announcing the formation of a task force dedicated to addressing the immediate needs of our homeless veterans. We will work tirelessly to ensure that no one who has served our country is left behind. The tension in the room dissolved, replaced by a sense of hope. Michael's shoulders sagged with relief. For the first time in years, he felt seen, heard, and valued. Michael's voice trembled as he began to speak, years of silent suffering finally finding release. The room fell silent, hanging on every word as he shared his journey from decorated soldier to forgotten citizen. His story unfolded like a map of scars, each one a testament to a system that had failed him. I never thought I'd end up here, Michael began, his eyes fixed on a point somewhere beyond the present. When I enlisted, I believed in something greater than myself. I was ready to lay down my life for my country. He recounted his tours in Afghanistan, the camaraderie forged in the crucible of war, and the constant specter of danger that haunted their every move. But it was the return home that proved to be his greatest battle. Coming back, everything felt off, Michael continued, his hands fidgeting with the frayed edges of his jacket. The world had moved on without me, and I couldn't find my place in it anymore. The transition to civilian life had been a minefield of its own. The skills that had made him an exemplary soldier seemed ill-suited for the job market. Employers struggled to understand how his military experience translated to their needs, and Michael found himself facing rejection after rejection. As he spoke, the weight of his experiences hung heavy in the air. Michael described the creeping isolation, the nightmares that plagued his sleep, and the growing distance between himself and his loved ones. PTSD became a living, breathing entity that consumed his daily life. I tried to get help, Michael said, his voice barely above a whisper. But navigating the VA system felt like another war. Appointments were months away, paperwork got lost, and I felt like just another number in a system that was already overwhelmed. The downward spiral accelerated. Unable to hold down a job and struggling with his mental health, Michael's savings dwindled. One missed rent payment became two, then three, and before he knew it, Michael found himself on the streets. The first night I slept in my car, I couldn't believe it had come to this, he said, his voice cracking. I kept thinking, is this what I fought for? Is this how my country repays its soldiers? As Michael's story unfolded, it became clear that his experience was far from unique. Across the country, thousands of veterans faced similar challenges. The statistics were staggering. Veterans were 50% more likely to become homeless than other Americans, with many citing PTSD, substance abuse, and lack of support as contributing factors. I never wanted to be a burden, Michael said, his eyes finally meeting those of his audience. But I realized that by staying silent, I was doing a disservice not just to myself, but to all the other veterans out there who are struggling. We need to talk about this. We need to do better. As Michael's words hung in the air, a palpable sense of purpose filled the room. His courage in sharing his story had not only given voice to his own struggles, but had also opened the eyes of those listening to the harsh realities faced by many veterans. Melania's eyes shimmered with newfound determination as she turned to her staff, her voice steady with resolve. We need to act now, she declared, her gaze sweeping across the room. The veteran's raw, heartfelt story had struck a chord deep within her, igniting a fire that demanded immediate action. Without hesitation, Melania instructed her team to gather information on local shelters, Veterans Affairs offices, and support organizations. Her fingers flew across her phone screen, making calls to contacts who could provide immediate assistance. The room buzzed with urgency, staff members scrambling to fulfill her requests. As Melania worked to secure help for the veteran, she encountered bureaucratic red tape. Protocols threatened to slow the process, but she refused to let them stand in her way. She leveraged her position, making personal appeals to officials and cutting through the usual channels. This man served our country, she reminded a hesitant administrator. We owe him our immediate support. Her persistence paid off. Within hours, Melania had arranged for the veteran to be transported to a nearby shelter specializing in assisting former military personnel. She ensured he would receive a comprehensive health assessment, including mental health services, and connected him with a VA representative to expedite his benefits claim. One aide, visibly moved, whispered to a colleague, I've never seen her like this. It's like she's on a mission. As word of Melania's actions spread, the atmosphere in the room shifted. People who had previously viewed the First Lady as a distant figure suddenly saw her in a new light, as someone who genuinely cared and was willing to take concrete action. The potential impact of this act of kindness rippled outward. Other public figures, inspired by Melania's example, began to take notice. Senators and representatives who had long debated veteran homelessness policies now felt a renewed sense of urgency. Local community leaders reached out to their homeless veteran populations, seeking ways to provide immediate support. 2 weeks later, Melania received a letter from the veteran she had helped. His words, penned in a shaky hand, spoke volumes. "Dear Mrs. Trump, I never thought I'd be writing to the First Lady, but here I am. Thanks to your help, I'm off the streets. I'm getting the medical care I've needed for years. For the first time in a long time, I feel like I have a future. You gave me hope, and that's worth more than anything." The letter circulated among Melania's staff, each reader wiping away tears as they passed it along. For the veteran, Melania's response had been life-changing. He had gone from a man on the brink of giving up to someone actively working towards recovery and reintegration into society. The news of Melania Trump's encounter with the homeless veteran spread rapidly across the nation. Within hours, social media platforms buzzed with discussions, and major news networks rushed to cover the story. The image of the First Lady embracing a struggling veteran struck a chord with Americans from all walks of life. In living rooms across the country, families gathered around television sets, watching as commentators debated the significance of the moment. The encounter sparked discussions about leadership responsibilities and public figures addressing social issues. As the story gained traction, public interest in veteran homelessness surged. People who had previously been unaware of the problem's extent felt compelled to learn more. Local news stations began running special segments highlighting veterans' struggles in their communities. The impact of the encounter rippled through society, inspiring action. In Seattle, tech entrepreneurs launched a crowdfunding campaign for a transitional housing facility, raising $2 million in a week. In Chicago, restaurants provided free meals to veterans in need, serving over 1,000 meals in the first month. The momentum continued as politicians recognized the groundswell of support. Congressional hearings on veteran homelessness drew standing room-only crowds. Lawmakers introduced bills to expand housing assistance, mental health services, and job training programs for veterans. Public awareness shifted dramatically. A national poll showed that 78% of Americans now considered veteran homelessness a critical issue, up from 45% a month prior. The same poll revealed that 62% of respondents had taken action to support homeless veterans. In Austin, Texas, Marcus, a formerly homeless veteran, shared his journey from sleeping in a park to becoming a peer counselor at a local VA center. "Seeing that encounter on the news," Marcus said, "it made me feel like maybe someone out there really did care. It gave me the courage to reach out for help." Veterans Affairs offices reported a 300% increase in inquiries about housing assistance and mental health services. Corporate America stepped up, with several Fortune 500 companies announcing new hiring initiatives for veterans transitioning out of homelessness. As the nation grappled with this renewed focus on veteran homelessness, Melania Trump's team worked behind the scenes, coordinating with agencies, nonprofits, and local governments to streamline access to services for homeless veterans. A new hotline was established, providing 24/7 support and connecting veterans directly to resources. As the golden hues of sunset painted the sky, casting long shadows across the city, the harsh reality of veteran homelessness persisted. In alleyways and abandoned lots, men and women who once stood tall in uniform now huddled against the encroaching darkness, their battles far from over. John, a former Marine, leaned against a graffiti-covered wall, his weathered face a roadmap of struggle and resilience. His eyes, once sharp with purpose, now carried a distant gaze as he watched the world rush by. The cardboard sign at his feet told a story of sacrifice and abandonment. "Veteran, need help. God bless." Across town, Sarah, an Army veteran, carefully arranged her meager belongings in a shopping cart. Her hands, once steady on the controls of military vehicles, now trembled as she counted the few coins in her pocket. The night ahead loomed long and cold, a stark contrast to the camaraderie and security she once knew. These scenes played out in cities across America, a sobering reminder that the crisis of veteran homelessness remained a national shame. For every success story, countless others still fought daily battles against PTSD, addiction, and a system ill-equipped to meet their needs. In Chicago, a revolutionary program called Boots to Roots was gaining traction. Founded by former Army Sergeant Michael Chen, the initiative paired homeless veterans with local farmers, providing both housing and meaningful work. "It's about giving them purpose again," Chen said, his eyes bright with passion. "When you've lost everything, sometimes all you need is a chance to feel useful, to contribute." The program offered veterans a chance to live and work on farms, learning sustainable agriculture techniques while rebuilding their lives. Participants received counseling, job training, and a supportive community of fellow veterans. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a leading expert on veteran reintegration, emphasized the need for comprehensive support. Many of these individuals are dealing with complex trauma, she explained. They need mental health services, job training, and a sense of community. We're making strides, but the gap between needs and resources remains vast. Tom, a former Navy corpsman, found himself caught in a cycle of despair. Some days I can't even remember who I used to be, he confessed, his voice barely above a whisper. You try to hold on to hope, but it slips away a little more each night you spend on these streets. Dr. Rodriguez remained cautiously optimistic about the long-term outlook. We need to catch these veterans before they fall through the cracks, she urged. That means better screening for mental health issues, more robust transition programs, and a support network that doesn't disappear once they're out of uniform. As night fell, John and Sarah prepared for another night on the streets, their stories a stark reminder of the work yet to be done. But in Chicago and beyond, seeds of hope were taking root, offering a glimpse of a future where no veteran would be left behind. The echoes of Melania Trump's encounter with the homeless veteran reverberated nationwide, sparking compassion and action. In Seattle, tech entrepreneurs raised millions for veteran housing. Chicago restaurants served free meals to those in need. But the true power lay in small acts of kindness. Marcus, once homeless, found purpose as a VA counselor. Tom reconnected with himself through Boots to Roots. Revisiting Michael's story, his eyes filled with hope, we're reminded of the ongoing struggle. Dr. Rodriguez's words resonate. These individuals face complex trauma. The path forward demands sustained action. Consider volunteering at shelters, donating to veteran support programs, or offering a listening ear. Remember, 1 in 4 homeless adults once served our country. Together, we can ensure no veteran is left behind in the shadows of our streets.